Everyone, welcome to Exploring Music 8, Music Rock, History of Rock and Roll. I am your teacher, Mr. DeJoseph, and what better place to start? We've already covered the pre-rock and roll source material, whether we're talking about the work songs and spirituals of the 19th century. We have a special guest here joining us. This is Rosalia DeJoseph. Okay, say hi. Say hi, Rosie. Okay. Well, whether we're talking about the work songs and spirituals of the 19th century, or we are talking about the blues that immediately preceded this rock and roll explosion, now we're getting right into the rock and roll era in the 1950s. We've already, to a certain extent, previewed it in these past couple of weeks, but now we're going to dive head on, and we're going to start with someone who many people view as synonymous with rock and roll in the 1950s, Elvis Presley. By far the biggest rock star of his era, and few people today really appreciate just how big he really was, and we're going to get into that in this presentation here about just how big of a celebrity Elvis really was, and how big of a successful musician that he was. He has records that remain unbroken to this very day, so we're gonna talk about that. But let's talk about the man himself first. There he is. Man, what a handsome fella. Actually, I think I kind of look like him with that sans beard. Come on, you can see it, right? That's Smolder. All right. Well, let's talk about him. Elvis grew up in the South in the 1940s, and like many people who grew up in the South during that time, and even to this day, to a certain degree, they are influenced heavily by hymns, gospel music, country, and bluegrass. That's the type of music that he was really raised on and brought up on. In 1947, his family moved to Memphis, Tennessee from Mississippi, and he began to listen to the blues and R&B, which really introduced him to rock and roll. And then the earliest recording that we have of Elvis is from 1953, where he went to Sun Record Studios, a label that he would later be signed to, and he paid $4. They had these record booths there where you could go and record yourself singing. They used to have this too. Even I remember this when I was a kid in the 90s. They would have different things like this at like amusement parks and stuff, where you would go into a record booth and record yourself, and they would give you the cassette. This was kind of the same thing, only instead of a cassette tape, they would give you a record. And he paid $4 to do this. He recorded two songs, a song called My Happiness and another song called That's When Your Heartache Begins. And he did this for his mother's birthday. This is a birthday gift from Mom. But when he was at Sun Records, he obviously met some people there and impressed some people, because he would be hanging out there for a lot of his youth when he first moved to Memphis. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. All right, so here we see Elvis pictured in concert in 1956. Now remember, in 1953, that is where Elvis, we have that first recording of him, which, was a birthday present for Mom. But in just 3 years, look at this crowd that he's performing in front of. I mean, it's huge. So what happened in these 3 years that made him such a huge celebrity already? I mean, in 1956, he hadn't even reached the heights that he would reach. So, what happened in this 3-year period that made him so big? Well, in 1954, this was a during a break in a recording session for another artist, guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Billy Black, along with Elvis, began to just jam out on a tune. They would, this was not planned, this was just for fun during a break. And they began to sing this song called That's All Right, which was originally by Arthur Crudup, a great blues legend. Okay. But people who were there in the studio that day, it got such a great response that they decided to release the recording of it that they did together, and it was a big local hit. Okay, a big sensation throughout Memphis, which is a great music city. Actually, you may know the nickname for Memphis is actually Music City, USA. That's its nickname. And it was released with the B-side called Blue Moon of Kentucky. If you don't know, back in the day when you would get singles, individual single records, you would buy these albums, these small albums that just had one song on them, for the single, and then as a bonus, it had what we would call the B-side, and that would be if you turned it over, then you got a bonus song. In this case, the bonus song was called Blue Moon of Kentucky. 2 months later, Presley, Moore, and Black released a song called Good Rockin' Tonight. And in less than a year, Elvis became the most popular entertainer in the Mid-South, and he was on the rise after that, ladies and gentlemen. It wasn't long before he was a huge national and international celebrity. In 1955, a man called Colonel Tom Parker, who was the president of Sun Records, arranged for RCA, a rival record company, to buy out Elvis's contract for only $35,000. And in today's dollars, that would be roughly $316,000. I mean, that's a lot of money, but Elvis would go on to make millions and millions of dollars. So it's kind of regarded as one of the biggest blunders in the record industry history. So why would Colonel Tom Parker do that? What do you think? Like, why do you think he might do that? Well, part of the reason why is because he had in his back pocket another young artist who had a great hit #1 song called Blue Suede Shoes, and his name was Carl Perkins. Now, some of you may have heard of the name Carl Perkins before, but chances are you probably haven't, and chances are you probably have heard of Elvis before. Well, Carl Perkins never really took off in the same way that Elvis did. He did have that really big hit, and he's considered, he's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame now. He's, considered to be one of these great early rock and roll stars. But what happened was he was in his tour bus got into an accident, and it put him on the shelf for about a year, and he just lost a lot of the momentum that he had. He never really recovered, and it's just one of the tragedies of rock and roll, really. Elvis would go on to be this huge megastar, and Carl Perkins is kind of like he's more than just the answer to a trivia question, but he's not as highly regarded. Let's just say that. All right, Elvis conquering the charts. Let's talk about some of these numbers here. Okay, so this is just really impressive stuff that I hope if you guys don't listen to Elvis, which I'm sure you probably don't, at least we can gain an appreciation for the type of artist that he was and how big of a hit maker he was. Okay, so in 1956, Elvis had a #1 hit song in 3 different categories. That's like amazing. You would never have that today, or I mean, probably not, right? It's so unique to have this. So he had the #1 country song called "I Forgot to Remember to Forget," the #1 R&B song, think rock and roll, called Heartbreak Hotel, and the #1 pop song called I Want You, I Need You, I Love You. Okay, so uh, 3 #1 songs in 3 different categories all in the same year. In 1957, now 1957 is, I mean, look at some of these songs. Even if you're not a big Elvis stan, you probably have heard of these songs before. And these all came out in 1957. Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel, Love Me Tender, Jailhouse Rock, All Shook Up, Teddy Bear. Okay, these are major, major hit songs that are still played today. So, and these all happened in 1957. On January 6th of 1957, he appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show from the waist up. He was only shot from the waist up. Now, why do you think that is? I'll give you a second to think. Well, boys and girls, it was because back in those days, his style of dancing was considered too suggestive, too explicit, too obscene for primetime television. Families are watching. We can't be watching Elvis shaking his pelvis all on the TV. Now, I'm going to post here in the notes and on our Google Classroom, I'm going to post a clip from this appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. And, you know, it's like, what's the big deal, right? Who really care? I mean, you might look at this and be like, my grandma dances like that. Why were people so offended by this? And that can be hard for us to understand, especially we who live in the era of Cardi B and other artists who have, we'll say, far more explicit dance moves than Elvis did. But uh, in those days, standards and morals were much different. They were much more conservative, and because of that, this was like a huge scandal to have this. In 1958, he was drafted into the Army. Okay, we had the compulsory military draft, and in 1958 we were in the Vietnam War. Okay, that was just kind of right at the beginning. And he was stationed in Germany, and he never saw combat. I think it would have been maybe a little foolish to place Elvis into on the front lines, not because he wouldn't be capable, but because that would not do well for the morale of the country to have the #1 celebrity in the country be injured or worse in battle. But he did serve, and he was stationed in Germany, as I said, went through basic training, did everything that every other soldier there was required to do. And if you hear later interviews with Elvis, he is very proud to have served his country in the military during this time. And it did drum up a little bit of support for the war effort early on. As you may know, Vietnam is considered to be a largely unpopular war in our country's history. But early on, this did get some support for the war, having Elvis, seeing him on TV in his fatigues and doing the basic training and things like that. That was good for morale. Elvis conquers Hollywood. Okay, Elvis was not just one of the biggest music stars of his day. He was also a tremendous Hollywood film star. Okay, and because of this kind of his double threat of acting and performing music, almost all of his movies had music attached to it or a song attached to it that he would go on and kind of cross promote, right? The movie would make people want to buy the album to get the song, and listening to the song would make people want to go see the movie. So this was kind of this cross promotion, this double threat that Elvis was. Okay, here he is on one of his most famous posters for the movie Jailhouse Rock. All right, and these are just some of the many movies that Elvis was in. He was in Love Me Tender in 1956, Loving You in Jailhouse Rock in 1957, King Creole in 1958, Flaming Star in 1960, Blue Hawaii in 1961. Blue Hawaii is where you get the song I Can't Help Falling in Love with You. Okay, if you didn't know. 1964, we have Viva Las Vegas. And those are just some of the 31 different major motion pictures that Elvis starred in. Okay. Now, these are not really Oscar winning performances. Okay. Right. This is like, but they are fun movies and they did very well in the box office because they have, this huge celebrity and Elvis starring in them. Let's see. Okay. So, uh, throughout the 1960s, Elvis starts to really wane in popularity. There's a couple reasons for this. Number one, his fans are getting a little bit older, and because of that, you have the younger generation, which is, really the youth generations really, uh, push forward and decide what music is popular. And another reason for this is because in 1964, you get a band called the Beatles, which comes on the Ed Sullivan Show. By the way, Ed Sullivan, that's a name we're going to mention a few times. He's a very important person, but I want to move on right now. But we are going to talk a little bit about Ed Sullivan, a man who hosted a talk show which gave many artists their start, or if it didn't give them their start, it made them immensely popular by being on the show. So, Elvis was on Ed Sullivan, and the Beatles came on Ed Sullivan in 1964, which started a huge wave of popular music called the British Invasion. We're going to talk about that in length coming up in a different unit, but needless to say, this was a new style of rock and roll that the youth was really drawn to, and they were not really into Elvis's 1950s style of rock and roll throughout the 1960s. So, but what ends up happening is that in 1968 they have what's called the comeback special airs live on TV. There is Elvis. So this is a kind of an iconic image of Elvis in the all black leather suit there, and it's a very intimate performance. There's maybe a couple hundred people in the audience, and this aired on primetime TV in December of 1968, aired live on NBC. And it's a very stripped down performance. It's not, Elvis is known as being a great showman, but here it's very stripped down, just him and a few musicians on stage, and okay, it's fine. Just him and a couple musicians on stage, and they're giving, a real raw, authentic performance here of some of Elvis's biggest songs. As a matter of fact, they even introduced a new song called Suspicious Minds, which was a #1 song in 1969, actually it was just about a month after the special aired on TV. But what you get to see here from Elvis is you get to see a really authentic portrayal. You see him on stage with his music, with his band members, and he's joking around. Sometimes they're in the middle of a song, they'll start laughing. In different songs, Elvis might forget the words, and they start like ragging their parts. Whoops, sorry about that. Okay, well, I guess that's done. Thanks, Rosalia. So, but anyway, I'm going to post a couple of links there in the Google Classroom for you to listen to part of this comeback special, because it really humanized Elvis. it made people think, man, he's not just this big celebrity that's not accessible. It's like he is a really accessible. He seems like he's a fun guy to hang around, and that's how Elvis was viewed in this thing, and it really did give Elvis a second wind. It gave him almost like a second career after he had kind of waned in popularity a little bit. All right, so now we're moving on to the next stage of Elvis's career, which is Elvis in the 1970s and his pioneering career in Las Vegas. So here's another iconic image of Elvis, and not the all black leather, but the all white leather, rhinestone studded with the red scarf. Okay, this is the era that Elvis comes around. Okay, so from 1969 to 1977, Elvis performed over 1,000 sold-out shows in Las Vegas and on tour. And Elvis really popularizes something called the Las Vegas residency. Okay, you had some other people like Frank Sinatra who were doing residencies in Las Vegas before, but this really actually starts a trend that continues to this day, where many popular artists will set up in Las Vegas and they'll perform at casino hotels, and they'll do all these sold out shows because as some of you might have even been to Las Vegas before. It's a big tourist attraction area, and people, lots of big stars come there and put on shows, and Elvis has really kind of revolutionized how that was done. In 1973, his Aloha from Hawaii concert airs on TV. It's really the first, or one of the first, broadcast worldwide live via satellite, and many people consider it to be the best performance of his career. And it's a pretty good one. He does some of his songs. He actually does some Frank Sinatra songs too. It's a pretty good concert. You can find it on YouTube. And then, unfortunately, Elvis meets a tragically early end to his life on August 16th, 1977. He had been addicted to prescription drugs. He also had alcohol problems and different drug problems. And he also had a history of a weak heart and kidneys. And these things were not a good mix, and they ultimately led to Elvis's early death at the age of 42 in 1977. This is the unfortunate side of rock and roll. We've kind of talked about this in class before, that we can enjoy the music. We can, and this goes for whatever your favorite style of music is anyway. We can enjoy the music. We can appreciate the gifts and talents of the artist, but we want to be careful about who we idolize and who we model ourselves after, and who we consider to be our role models, because oftentimes there's a side that we don't see, right? And it doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean that they're bad or anything like that. It just means that there's a side that we don't see, and a lot of times we don't want to. We see their lives as being glamorous, and we can romanticize that, but it's not always as glamorous as it appears. I guess we'll just leave it at that. What's wrong, Rosalia? Hi. Okay. So we're wrapping up here, but here's some musical milestones from Elvis. These are just really impressive stats, I think. Really? Okay. So here are some other records set by Elvis. From March of 1956 to November of 1959, there was at least one Elvis song on the singles charts. Kind of impressive, right? From 1956 to 1962, he had 24 top 5 singles in a row, which sold in excess of 1 million copies. 24 top 5 platinum singles. Okay, the closest anyone has ever come to this was Madonna in the late 1980s and early 90s. She had 19 consecutive top 5 hits. On the official UK Top 40 charts, It's Now or Never reached number 1 the week of January 30th, 2005, 27 years after Elvis died. So that's just a testament to his lasting, his lasting, sorry, his lasting ability into the future. 27 years after he dies, he is still getting number 1 songs. Elvis has 116.5 million albums and approximately 50 million singles certified by the recording industry in the United States, making his total U.S. record sales approximately $167 million. Not million dollars, million albums. Sorry, not $1 million, 167 million albums. Very impressive. During his lifetime, he recorded 104 singles that hit the top 40 on the Billboard charts. He had 18 number 1 Billboard hits, including 4 singles in 1956 that occupied the top of the charts for a cumulative total of 25 weeks. The total 18 is surpassed only by the Beatles, who had 20 number 1 hits, and his closest competitor is Mariah Carey with a total of 16 number 1 hits. So he's in second place with 18, just 2 behind the Beatles, who had 20, and 2 ahead of Mariah Carey, who had 16 number 1 hits. He had 38 top 10 Billboard hits. This total is currently unchallenged. It's number 1. The closest competitor is Madonna, who has 35. The Beatles had 34 top 10 hits during their career. Some quotes about Elvis. Jimmy Buffett, who you might know as the Margaritaville guy, he said Elvis was the only man from Northeast Mississippi who could shake his hips and still be loved by rednecks, cops, and hippies. Elvis had mass appeal, in other words, folks. The great folk rock artist Bob Dylan said, "When I heard Elvis's voice, I just knew that I wasn't going to work for anybody and nobody was going to be my boss. He is the He is the deity supreme of the rock and roll religion as it exists in today's form. Hearing him for the first time was like busting out of jail. I thank God for Elvis Presley. Elvis recorded a song of mine, and that's the one recording I treasure the most." High praise from Bob Dylan, a very well-known and respected artist in his own right. Okay, yeah. Don't blame it on Elvis for shaking his pelvis. Shaking the pelvis been in style since way back in the River Nile. That's the fabulous McClurdy's Calypso singers from 1957. John Lennon from the Beatles said, "Before Elvis, there was nothing." Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones said, "Before Elvis, everything was in black and white. Then came Elvis and zoom, glorious Technicolor." By the way, are you noticing something? Bob Dylan, John Lennon, Keith Richards, these are like huge, huge artists. One of the top-selling country artists of all time, Garth Brooks, said, "No one will ever touch Elvis." One of Elvis' contemporaries, Buddy Holly, said, "Without Elvis, none of us could have made it." New Jersey's own Bruce Springsteen says, "That Elvis man, he is all there is. There ain't no more. Everything starts and ends with him. He wrote the book." Okay, so that's going to conclude it for us today, folks. It's coming in about 30 minutes, okay? A little bit longer than I had intended, but there you go. If you have any questions about Elvis, and I apologize for my little friend here who's being kind of antsy, but you know. But we'll forgive her for that. But if you have any questions, please email me or shoot me a message on Google Classroom. especially during my office hours, I'll be able to respond to it right away. My office hours, once again, are from 1:30 to 2:15 p.m. every day. Whether it's an orange or black day, I'm there every day ready to answer your questions. And in our next class, we will go over some of the other big artists from the 1950s. And I'm really looking forward to doing that with you. I'm trying to think, is there anything else that we want to cover? Oh yeah, there's some questions here you'll see attached to the Google Classroom assignment. Answer those questions um, and send them in to me. They're not graded, but they I think they'll help you. We'll have a quiz at the end of this week, and next week is spring break. So I hope everyone has a great day. And once again, I'm here for any questions. Just let me know. Take care and comb your hair. Goodbye.